Hello and welcome. My name's Daniel Knox. Welcome to this lecture or workshop all about the design process. I'm a lecturer in product design at Wrexham Glyndŵr University, and this is being produced in May 2021. So I'm going to run through now a few things about the kind of the workshop or the lecture, but feel free to go through this at any speed you want to. Really, I put some kind of all sections throughout the process for you to kind of spend 10 minutes running through an activity with whoever you're kind of facilitating it with, your group. But feel free to kind of pause it, spend a couple of days on each thing if you want. If you want to run it as a kind of a lesson, you want to run through each phase as a different lesson, that's absolutely fine. It's really aimed at high school aged students, but can be tailored to others if need be. Depending on who's facilitating it. So this is this will take about 60 minutes to about 90 minutes, depending on how you run the session. And it's a kind of a presentation and an activity to be run with a class, and it's all around the kind of the design process, mainly aimed at product design, but can be kind of tailored to a number of things really. So as I've just mentioned here, please play and pause the video as you wish to kind of proceed through the presentation. And there will be kind of hints and captions along the way to tell you when to do that. And it will take you through the process of designing a product. So just a quick introduction about me. As I mentioned, my name is Daniel, and I'm fairly new to lecturing, but I've been in the industry of kind of product design and engineering for around 15 years. So I've most recently worked at Unilever in the global packaging department. Previous to that, I was at Dyson working in the global design center down in Malmesbury. I've also started my own customizable furniture company a good number of years ago now, called Tabluka. And I've also worked in a bit of a niche industry, the performance fabrics industry, designing kind of life rafts and life jackets and pilot flight equipment for fast jet aeroplanes. So this is just a bit of an overview of what we're going to be looking at today. And it's essentially the design process or sprint design process, depending how fast we run it. Here you can see it kind of starts all the way at the beginning where we define the problem. We move through to kind of briefing the problem and then possibly reframing it too. And then we kind of look at the requirements of what we need this product to do. And then we run into the idea generation and development. And then hopefully we do some prototyping, some testing, and then right at the end we can look at the evaluation and then the kind of present and communicate phase. So this is briefly what I just ran over before. So this is the kind of the design process cycle that we kind of employ as product designers. It's very much a circular cycle. It's not a linear cycle as it may well used to have been in the past. So as I said, we have the understand phase, we have the create phase, prototype phase, and then the evaluate. And through all of this, we're trying to understand sustainability, the product life cycle, during all of these phases. That's really important that we consider that. So just a bit of an introduction into kind of product design and that where I teach product design. So as mentioned, I'm a lecturer in product design at Glyndŵr University, and we run a course called BA Product Design. It's a fairly new course, but it's where we're trying to essentially, what I'm showing you today, we're doing this in a very detailed way over 3 years. So we're really trying to employ the core design skills to make you a good designer. We have some really good practical and workshop facilities available too for kind of the end of the first year, the second year and third year. So when you've got the core design principles taught and you're aware of those, you can then put them into practice in the workshop. And we're also the first in Wales and the 6th in the UK for the overall satisfaction in the area. of creative arts. And okay, so what I'd like to do now is to split into groups. But before I do, I just want to make sure you have some materials available. So you're going to need some very simple set of materials for this task and this lecture and this lesson. So you can get more things than this if you need, but ideally we need some paper, some card, some pencils, some coloring pencils, some glue, and some. Feel free to get some more exotic things if you need to. Okay, so this is the time where you can now pause the video and pause this video for about 5 minutes or however long it takes to essentially split into groups of 2 to 4 people and get the materials that you need. So depending on the number of people in the class that you're teaching or where this is being run from will depend on how many people you can split into. Yeah, we're ideally looking for groups of kind of 2 to 4. So please pause this video now and play it when you've. Okay, so hopefully you've managed to split into groups or teams to kind of run through this project together with. So at the beginning of any design process, you have a brief, whether this is set to you by somebody else, by a company, by an external company, internal company, or whether you create one yourself, you always have a brief. And it's normally based obviously on a problem that you're trying to fix and with some context. So what I've done, I've created a very small brief or a very simple brief for you here. And then as we'll run through the project, I want you to kind of expand on it. So according to Mintel, 76% of Brits now buy lunch out for an everyday occasion, up from 64% in 2016. While it's been a tough year for many, it seems that the packed lunch just isn't cutting the mustard for Brits anymore. So I would like you to design a food holder box that will encourage workers to use packed lunches more. Okay, so that is the brief. Design a food holder box that will encourage workers to use packed lunches more. Okay, so now if we have a look at the process itself. So as I mentioned before, we start off with the understand phase. And this is all about kind of understanding the problem and defining the problem. So let's look at the problem to start off with. So here we have to understand the context. Okay. So part of this can be the experience of the consumer. So the consumer is the person who is buy the product and going to use the product. So first of all, who is the consumer? And try and understand what do they do, what do they think, and what do they feel whilst using maybe the current solution that's available, the current lunchbox. How does it make them feel? Any good things or bad things that you can get from it? And the reason we do this is because it validates and communicates our idea. So the best way to do this is to meet these people. So for example, in our teams, in our workshop today, this can be ourselves. We all probably use packed lunches quite often, or we certainly have done. Or maybe that we need to speak to the person running the presentation, so maybe your teacher, and ask them for some feedback on lunchboxes as well. So as I mentioned here, so meet them, understand who we're designing for, and you can put together an experience map if you like. And this is just mapping out where the consumer will buy the product, where they will use it, and run through kind of any during each touch point, try and understand the good bits and the bad bits with the current solution. And then as you design your product, your new product, you can then overlay your idea over the top and see if it improves the bad points and improves the good points that are already there. And this is the full life cycle product, all the way from purchase, all the way through use, and it can be all the way through kind of disposal too, or reuse possibly as well. As I mentioned, what do they do? How they feel? What do they do with it at the end? And we're trying to find gaps in the experience and look to improve it. Here we can use a physical product if we can, but due to time constraints, maybe we can just kind of talk to them about their current solution. So now is the next stage of pausing the video. So if you pause this video for around 10 minutes and try and understand the problem. So as I mentioned, speak to other people in your group, speak to other groups, speak to teachers, people running the presentation, and get an idea for the current problem of the lunchbox, if there are any, from the people you. Brilliant. So hopefully you've spent around 10 minutes or so trying to understand what the current problem is. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the brief. So I gave you a brief, but I want you to kind of expand on that just so you kind of familiar with all the different areas of the design process. So I want you to now write a more detailed brief built upon what I gave you at the beginning. So this should include a description of the problem. And now you've kind of looked at the context and the problem of current lunchboxes. I want you to build upon this and describe the problem in a bit more detail. Also, because you spoke to the users, you can list down here what are the users' desires. You can also expand on this and try and include kind of some sort of metrics. So maybe what size will it be, or what size would the consumer like it to be? How might it be made? Or how would you like your brief to be taken? So would you like it to be made out of plastic, or maybe cardboard, so it could be reused, or a different type of material that you have in. So also what would it be made from, which I kind of mentioned, but so maybe how might it be made is maybe the manufacturing process too. So here you can look at maybe it comes as a net and it's folded together, or does it come and it's already assembled and it's ready to use straight away. And here you can also include some sort of costing metrics to it. How much would you like it to cost, and what's is the current problem with the current lunchboxes that they cost too much? So you're trying to reduce the cost, or maybe they're not premium enough and you'd like to increase the cost and make the product more premium. Okay, so here's another pause where we pause the video for 10 minutes. Gives you time to write your brief as a group. Brilliant. Okay, hopefully you've all put your briefs together as a group. So here now, we're moving on to the create phase. And this is really looking at idea generation and development. And we have a bit of a first stage here is reframing the brief. And this can be done in the previous phase, or it can be done in this phase. But for the process of this video, I've included it in this one. So here we frame the brief, and from this we feed in from the brief that we've just written, and we also feed in some research and some insight based on what we've learned. From this, we will set some key requirements and some specification points. And then further on, we'll do some sketching and some development of ideas. Okay, so first of all, we're going to reframe the brief. So we're essentially going to look at the problem in a bit more detail and refine it even further. So are there any barriers or opportunities? Based on your research, have you discovered things that are kind of on trend or off trend? This might be looking at different materials, maybe. You can use the kind of the phrase or the saying, so how might we, at the beginning of all of the questions, how might we make it reusable? How might we make it from cardboard? How might we enable the lunchbox to be more interactive? And through all of this, the aim is to find opportunities within your design to essentially make the design better. So don't forget the research you've already done. So you've spoken to the consumer, so you can feed in this information and any key insights you gain from this. So if there's a few things that a few people are saying that are familiar, such as it needs to be bigger, it needs to be made from a certain type of material, and we can include this in your reframed brief. And if you need to also go off and get a computer and do some research on the internet to understand some current solutions and the problems with it, then this is the time to do that too. So now is the time to pause the video for another 10 minutes or so, depending on how long you'd like to spend on this task. And building from the brief that we've already created, I want you to reframe the brief and find some more opportunities. Okay, brilliant. So hopefully you put together a kind of reframed brief now. And now on the stage where we're going to set some key requirements. So this is where we're kind of making the design a lot more kind of detailed, so we know what sort of ideas we want to try and generate in the next phase. So these can be called requirements, or maybe specification points that you might be familiar with from other things. But here we're trying to understand what it must do to be successful. So for example, the product should, and then we can reel off a number of things here. Here I kind of want essentially a bullet point list with maybe 5 to 10 key requirements. So here are some examples here. So for example, the product should last for so long. What's the targeted cost? We looked at cost at the beginning. And now from your research and speaking to the consumer, you might have, you hopefully should have an idea of how much you'd like your product to cost when you've finished it. Is packaging needed, or will it be displayed with kind of as it is? Is it going to be sold online or in a shop? Very different requirements here. How big will it be? Is it going to hold a typical lunchbox, or is it going to hold more like snack type items to try and encourage the user to use it differently maybe? Is colour an opportunity for you? So what colour shall it be? What sort of testing should it pass? So hopefully you might have understood some problems with the previous one. Maybe you've discovered that the current solution, it breaks quite often. So here we might look to introduce some testing. So what sort of tests will those be? And then I mentioned that sustainability is a key thing here. So try and understand how the product will be recycled or reused or disposed of, depending on how you'd like your product to look at the end. So here's another point where we pause the video for around 10 minutes. And here I'd like to set yourself, as I mentioned, 5 to 10 key requirements that your design must do. Brilliant. So hopefully you've put together some key requirements or specification points based on what we just discussed. So you may be kind of thinking, so far the design process has been very, you've been writing a lot of things and creating a lot of kind of information. You've got some research, you've got some spoken to some people maybe, and you've got some research based on the brief. So now is where we get to essentially maybe a bit more of a fun stage and process. More like the design phase, I guess. Make it a bit more designery. But here is we're going to look at some sketch and development work. So drawing serves as a visual language for communication. It's universally understood. So the good thing about it is whatever we draw, there's a likelihood that anyone with any language should be able to understand it if we do it correctly. So here we can start off by drawing basic shapes, and we can slowly increase the complexity. And there's this quote that I like from Salvador Dali, and they mention that we have no fear of perfection. You'll never reach it. So what he's saying here is basically don't. So the best thing I'd say is just sketch freely and just try and just get as many ideas out as you can. And during that process, you would naturally just get better and better, whether it be over today or over the kind of the process of your design career, basically. So now, based on the information that we've gathered and the brief we put together and the specification and requirement points that we put together, I'd like you to spend around 10 minutes to just really go free and sketch some ideas of what your final solution may look like. Um, and just have fun with this, and try and just create as many ideas as you can. Do this as a group, whether there's two to 4 to 5 people. Maybe you want to take a certain area of the kind of your design and sketch that, or whether you all just want to sketch all the different areas together and come up with as many different concepts as you can. So again, pause the video for around 10 minutes. Start generating your ideas on paper using your pens, your pencils, your crayons. Have fun. And at the end of this, we're going to look to take 2 of your best ideas and to take forward into the development phase. To really try and be experimental with what you do, the materials you use. Try not to stick to kind of one idea that you have that you think might win in your head, because on the next stage, what we'll do is we'll take maybe bits from different designs and to kind of use it to create kind of 2 ideas to take forward and develop. Okay, so pause the video now and start creating some ideas for your idea sketch and development section. Brilliant. So hopefully you all had fun in that session and that phase of the design process. Now we're going to come on to the kind of the third stage, which is the prototype phase. So here we're looking to really kind of experiment with our concepts that we've generated and make some ideally some physical kind of products or prototypes. And this allows us to kind of test our ideas out, really. So if we look at what is a prototype, so a prototype is a quick way of physically testing an idea, like I said. Why do we do it? Well, it helps test and validate the robustness or the experience that a consumer may go through of an idea. How do we do this? Well, we can simulate an idea or a process or function. We can simulate a function or part of a design using card, wood, paper, 3D printing machines, and walking through an experience as well. And it's great to get feedback from all these, from all the prototypes that we make. It's really important to get feedback, which leads to improvements. And if I just jump through to just give you an example. So I mentioned before that I worked at Dyson for a few years. And you may or may not be familiar with James Dyson. So James Dyson, you probably have seen some of his products. You may well own one or two. So he's famous for inventing the kind of the bagless vacuum cleaner essentially, and the cyclone idea. So back in the 70s, 80s, when he was developing this, he became frustrated with his vacuum cleaner, which is what led him to kind of come up with his invention. So he set to work designing and prototyping a way of making the vacuum cleaner better. So after 5 years, which is a long time, after 5 years and more than 5,000 prototypes, he came up with his winning design. So just that duration and also the number of prototypes just gives you an example of how many iterations you might have to go through. And what he probably did, he probably made a couple of prototypes, really basic ones out of card. He has some of them on display at headquarters in Malmesbury in the offices. Made some simple prototypes. I think he actually put them onto an existing Hoover machine that he had and kind of made it all work with his new idea. So he would have made a few, tested them, refined it, made a few more, tested them, got some feedback from maybe his wife, friends, that sort of thing. And then he would have kind of ended up with his final solution, really. So now is the time to pause the video for around 10 minutes and create a prototype of one of the designs you've come up with. So it can be one, it could be more, but you've hopefully created a load of ideas in the previous phase. So take one or two of them, build a prototype using the materials you have. They can be really, really quite simple. They don't have to be polished and finished and beautiful prototypes. You just want to get an idea of maybe of size, of thickness, of maybe if they've got a lid, you want to prototype the lid potentially. you just want to get an idea of how the user might experience with it and kind of interact with it, and get feedback from people sitting next to you, from people in your group, from different groups, from your teacher. Feel free to take it home in the evening and get some feedback from your family or the people you live with. And this will just help you to develop and improve your designs and your concepts and this particular idea. And it may mean that the feedback is bad and you just have to completely change and go back to the kind of the previous phase, which is fine. It's all part of the kind of development process. Or you may be lucky and it might be a really great idea, and you can go in to build another prototype and improve it. So pause this video now and try and build a prototype. Brilliant. So hopefully you've spent some time building a prototype. And again, depending on the time that you have with this project, you can spend more time doing this as you can with any of these sections. You can develop them, you can improve them, you can build more prototypes, get feedback. Again, as I mentioned, feeds into the development and the improving of your design. But the next stage is the evaluation phase. So here we'd like to test the product. This is where we can test the product, get some feedback, and then essentially release the product, or maybe kind of go back to the concept phase, the idea generation and the prototyping phase, and redo what we've kind of done based on the feedback we've got, so to improve it. But if I just run over here some reasons on why we test your product. So we test a product. Why do we do it? To test a certain area that was a risk. So for example, with our lunchbox, maybe the high risk area would be that the container that we're designing, it's not able to take the food, so it will leak, for example. This is a big risk area, so this is something we want to test. What are we going to test? We're going to test any area, or potentially the whole assembly. So we could take a whole idea you've got, give it to someone, they can test it and get feedback. Or we could just test a certain area. So maybe it's the lid. We want to just test the clip and how it opens. We want to test the hinge. We want to test of how nice this is experience to do. And again, we want to get feedback on this. How do we do this? So we can just speak to people, getting feedback. We can do some lab testing. We can do some home testing. So we could just make a little prototype ourselves. We could take it home and just use it for a couple of days. Or we could do what we call life cycle testing. And this is maybe for the hinge example that I just mentioned. Maybe we want to make kind of either do it ourselves. So some companies pay people just to do it, or some companies, maybe more like Dyson, have robots to do this sort of testing. And we just want to open and close the box hundreds and hundreds of times to simulate opening and closing it 3 times a day over maybe a 5-year lifespan of the product. We want to kind of open this thousands of times. So as I mentioned, this is all about testing, and then we want to kind of constantly improve our product based on the testing. So again, we can go back to certain areas of the design process that we've gone through, and we want to kind of constantly improve it, and we want to justify what we're doing. So again, this is another time where we pause the video for around 10 minutes. And we want to test your prototypes with other members in your group. So you can do it with other members in your group that you're sitting next to. You do it with teachers or whoever's facilitating this workshop, or we can do it with different members of your group. Or if you have longer, you can take this home and get some feedback from people you live with, your friends, your neighbors, sort of thing. So pause this video, perform some testing on your product, and then come back to the last phase. Brilliant, well done. So hopefully you've tested your product in whichever way you've done. So the kind of the last bit of this phase is to communicate your design idea. So you've probably all seen the TV program Dragon's Den. It's very similar to that, but it doesn't have to be as nerve-wracking as that, essentially. But essentially what we're going to do now is present your design idea back to your group. So again, depending on the facilitator, you can do this in a number of ways. You can present back to your teacher. If it's a teacher, you can present it back to the members of your group, or maybe each group you do a presentation for the other groups so everyone can see what you've done. And here again, you can just talk about it. You can spend some more time preparing it with maybe a PowerPoint, something similar to what I've done here using an online tool called Prezi. You could just create some posters maybe. So it's up to you how you do this, but when you do it, I want you to communicate lots of different areas. I want you to try and discuss what you did in all the phases of your design cycle. So, go back to the beginning and run through every phase and try and talk about different areas of your design during these phases. So essentially your development. I want you to talk about why you did them and what you discovered and what you kind of learned from these different areas. So all the way back to the consumer experience, what you learned from your consumer, why you set those requirements, which then led you to develop sketching in the way you did. Why did you do those? Why did you select the two different designs you did? And why did you go on to prototype and test different areas you did as well? Really important you communicate this to your audience. And then finally, get some feedback from your audience. What do you or your audience think that you could do better next time? So you could use this as part of your pitch. You could discuss ways that you might improve it next time if you were to run this process again. But also get feedback from your audience. They won't be so engrossed with the product if you're presenting it to different groups, so that will be very new to them. They'll be able to give you some good feedback, hopefully, of things that you could do better next time. So, very good. This is just a recap of the process too, if you need to use it, but also just to kind of run through what we did. If you remember all the way at the start, we looked at we had the understand phase. So this was understanding the problem with a current solution and kind of what we're trying to improve. And then we kind of move through to the create phase where we've had a brief and we're refining the brief, understanding the problem a bit more, and then starting to put together some ideas and some idea generation. Then we move on to the prototype phase. So this is where we made a prototype or prototypes out of different forms of material. And then lastly, I've just mentioned, we went on to the evaluate phase. And this is where we kind of test our idea, present it, get some feedback. So hopefully you've had a great time doing this. Just want to say well done. Hope you've enjoyed this workshop. I hope you've got something from it. I hope you found it fun. Feel free to do it again, or feel free to take the designs you've got and take them home. Spend some time improving them. And don't be afraid to kind of, when you've improved them, built some better prototypes, maybe come back and show your group or your teacher, your friends, how you've improved it. So thank you very much for participating in this workshop. If you have any other questions, or if you'd like me to do anything other for your kind of your group or your class or your school, please feel free to contact me.